Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 8th episode of CXO Spice Talk. Today's topic is AI trustworthiness. I have the pleasure of hosting Seth Dobrin, who is the Global Chief AI Officer at IBM. We will discuss the key tenets leaders should know about ethical AI. So before we dive into the discussion, let's welcome Seth and congratulate him on winning the AI Innovator of the Year by the AI Summit. Hi, Seth. Why don't you introduce yourself and share with the audience on how you got on a journey to AI?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you and talk to you and your audience. And I'm truly humbled by the honor that of AI Innovator of the Year. So thanks for bringing it up. So as Helen said, I'm the Global Chief AI Officer at IBM, and I think I'm one of the first people in the world with this title. But let me start back. So I'm actually a human geneticist, which seems a little bit odd to wind up at a tech company as a human geneticist. But if you look at kind of the origins of what we think about as big data, as much as I don't like that term, and AI, they really arise from the hard sciences. And so really, particularly from astrophysics and the fields of genetics. And so what we were doing 25 years ago when I was working on my PhD was very analogous to what we're doing today in terms of the tools and technologies and things like that. And in fact, a lot of what we think of as language models today were derived from genetic algorithms or algorithms used for genetics. And over the course of my career, I moved from focusing on scientific problems to focusing on business problems, and really using math and computer science to create net new value for businesses. And when you think about it, it comes down to the way you create net new value is you make a human's life better, cheaper, or faster. And so how do we leverage math and computer science to make humans' lives better, cheaper, or faster? And the important piece about this, and I talk about this pretty regularly now, is the human part. Mm-hmm. For AI to be successful, it needs to be human-centered. And so we need to start with the human. And we'll talk about that a lot today during the talk. And so my journey to where I am today really has been focused on how do you make people's life better, cheaper, or faster?
I love that, Seth. I'm so honored of having you on this podcast today, right? You think about the possibilities of AI improving our lives are endless, especially if we are open to creating an impact, right? You talked about net value earlier. So when we trust AI, we can trust AI as much as ourselves. To think about it, we have the privilege to make technology that reflects the best of our humanity. And the next century will see accelerated advances in tech. Right, some we have yet to discover, and others that are already underway, like greater connectivity, for example, or the expansive impact of big data. To put it simply, right, AI is the future, and the future won't wait. That is why creating robust, fair, and ethical AI is a priority for technology leaders. I definitely see the path to ethical AI built upon some basic tenets, right, such as data privacy, data quality, and most importantly, the trustworthiness, right? So let's start our discussion with the future, right? Let's say it's 2025 now. What is the role of AI in larger scale enterprises, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think to look at 2025, we need to look at the last 10 years. And so AI, the acceleration and adoption of AI had been fairly slow, if we're honest with ourselves, until the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. The pandemic hitting really forced businesses to think about what are the least expensive ways to create new value and the best ways to interact with their customers and employees, because no one was showing up anywhere, right? We were all interacting like this through Zoom and WebEx and whatnot. And so this really accelerated the adoption of AI, and it starts with simple things or relatively simple things like virtual agents. How do I find out, think back 2 years, right? How do I find out if my schools are closed, my kids' schools are closed, or if I can, what the rate of infection is in my area, or, now more recently, are vaccines available, all the way through to fixing supply chains. How do I leverage AI to optimize supply chains? And those are the kinds of things that we're still going to be seeing done and accelerated through AI, but in a much more effective and efficient manner. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll start seeing companies learn to adopt and, more importantly, operationalize AI to create value. And that value will be tied to, again, it's when we measure value in businesses, right? It's how do we, what's the new revenue that we're generating, or what money have we saved? So it's all about net new revenue and cost savings. And when we tie outcomes to those two things through a customer or employee lens, so who is a human going to be impacting, makes it much easier to operationalize the AI. We'll be doing these through new technologies. So the technologies that are coming up in the space are, large parameter language models for being able to do language-related natural language processing type technologies with small data. So you transfer what's learned from essentially the internet to your business case. Looking at something called neurosymbolic learning, which think about it as a way to put human contextualization algorithmically as an AI model or around an AI model. And then in 3 years, we'll start to bleed into the beginning of the quantum AI, the impact of quantum on AI. And so we'll start seeing what were relatively intractable problems in AI begin to become more tractable.
That makes total sense to me. Through the many conversations with enterprise leaders, I learned that lack of trust is why some companies have not adopted AI into their business frameworks, right? The fear of unknown runs deep, right? The unknown behind the technology is oftentimes immense, and then teaming with threatening possibilities, right? However, when we are faced with change, our views have the potential to widen. Look what happened, right? The pandemic became a catalyst for transformation that actually inspired us to become more compassionate and forward thinking. This to me has marked the advancement of humankind throughout history, right? But how much do we need to fail before we get AI right?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And trust actually has deeper roots, right, than what we think about today after the pandemic and the social justice movement that went on. If I look back, 10, 15 years ago when we started implementing AI in the company that I was at before, trust came down to conversations like, well, is the model doesn't match what my team is doing, so it must be wrong. And so we would have to get into situations where we would do bake-offs. Essentially, we'd have to set up experiments to prove that the model was or wasn't right. And also get people comfortable with, if the human and the AI don't agree, it doesn't necessarily mean the AI is wrong. The human could be wrong, right? And you get into this conversation about precision and accuracy. So trust has been going on since we started implementing AI. It just wasn't explained like we're talking about it today. And when we think about trust today, we really talk about, it's really a conversation about, is the model transparent? So do I know how and why, and can I inspect the model? Is it explainable, meaning do I know how and why an AI came to a solution? Is it fair? So is it free of specific biases? And specific is important because you'll never be able to get rid of every bias. You need to get rid of biases that are important to you as a company and society that you operate in. Is it robust? And is it privacy preserving? And it's also, and you hit on an important part on the intro, that it's not just about the model, right? The AI actually starts with the data. And so all of these things that I mentioned, the transparency, the explainability, the fairness, the robustness, the privacy preserving, go all the way down to the data layer. And you need to make sure that you have that provenance of those things from the time that model interacts all the way back to when that data was collected.
That's really a salient point. I've heard a lot of buzz about explainable AI, right? Especially IBM, what you offer today in tracing AI reasoning is made much simpler through some of the solutions you offer. But how will AI influence some of the talent recruitment and acquisition, right? How will that we address some of the bias, as you probably heard was found with Amazon AI-powered recruitment tool back in 2015? There are tons of bias in that.
Yeah, so that gets back to the data issue, right? So, we need to keep in mind that the AI itself is, and when we talk about AI, it's an algorithm, so it's math. And math is inherently not biased. It just is, right? It's got no bias, it's got no preconceived notions. But when you train a algorithm, so when you train an equation, essentially, a mathematical equation, you're training it on data that has bias in it. Mm-hmm. You also need to remember that the database itself is not biased, right? The data that sits in that, and the data that sits in there got its bias from past decisions of humans. Mm-hmm. And so again, when we look at this through a human lens, we recognize that, historically, companies probably did not have an appropriate focus on diversity. And so if you're training a model to hire based on past hiring populations, the model is going to very likely be biased. And so what are things that you can do to prevent that from happening? And so there are other algorithms that test for bias. Mm-hmm. And that can also address the bias in your model. So they can adjust the features. So the features are the data elements that the model is focusing on, and adjust the weights of them or certain other, what we call hyperparameters around mm-hmm. them, to make sure that the bias is adjusted for. And basically you think about it, you look at what the expected distribution is and what the distribution you get out is. Mm-hmm. And that's a way oversimplified way that method that we use to interrogate the model to see if it's biased. But when we think about applying AI to HR use cases, it also, if you have that level of bias mitigation as well as a level of explainability, mm-hmm. it also provides some interesting insights, or can provide some interesting insights. And let's go back to the pandemic again. We were working with one of the largest retailers in the world on building models to make sure that their hiring process was not biased, right? Just mm-hmm. like you mentioned mm-hmm. earlier, or for, not biased against gender, or, age and certain protected groups. And during the course of this, we realized that the data underneath the model, so the data was drifting. So if they looked at the data that was coming in, so the demographics of the people that were applying to their jobs since the pandemic began changed from before. And that's because there were a lot of people out of work that were probably at different levels of qualification. And actually, they wanted to attract the type of people that were beginning to apply. And they were actually targeting the wrong audience with their ads because they didn't realize that the demographics of their applicants were changing. They didn't realize that this population of people were even interested in working at this company.
Wow.
And so because they had this level of transparency mm-hmm. of their model, again, down to the data layer, they were able to adjust their hiring practices and their focus, while they were reducing the bias that exists in their hiring and their algorithms that kind of process resumes to see, pass them to managers. They also got this insight that, boy, we were missing this opportunity in attracting much better talent for these jobs that we're posting.
Wow, that's really such a great example, right? Because CBS News talked about 45% of college grads from last year still out there looking for a job, while 90.3 million job vacancies out there are unfilled in recently. So it's a huge supply and demand gap, and it sounds like AI can really play a critical role in really meeting or bridging the gap. However, as spectacular as AI's impact may be, right, at its core, it's really just bits and bytes and zeros and ones, right? This is one reason why security and privacy of the data are at the core issue of governing, AI. And once systems are put into place to manage data throughout the entirety of the organization, AI becomes governable and less scary. And we then not only begin to trust AI, but we can also begin to trust our business and mission. And in turn, our customers can trust us, right? This is the value you talk about. So when you hear some of the people have different school of thoughts, they say, oh, AI will think for us, right? How do you react to that? And
so, myself personally and IBM, right? We firmly believe there's really a few tenets to what we think about as ethical AI, right? First and foremost, the data belongs to the creator. So again, models are derived from data. And so the data belongs to the creator, and they should have control over how their data is used. And that's codified in regulations like GDPR and CCPA, and other things. And we also believe that AI should be to augment human capabilities, not replace human capabilities. And that allows us to focus on more value-added work. And so when you think about, imagine I am in a call center, and there's now an AI that picks up the phone that actually works when you call, right? It actually can add value to you. And the AI is actually deflecting calls so that not so many of them are coming to the call center. What ends up happening is that may look like we're trying to reduce the number of people that are working in the call center. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the time that those agents spend with the customers can be more value added. And why should they waste their time doing very simple tasks that someone can do on their own when they no longer feel rushed to get off the phone and can actually make a customer happy, increase retention rate, and reduce the stress on them because they're not getting pressure. There's 5,000 people on hold. Why are you spending 5 minutes with this person? Instead, they're likely to get feedback that, boy, I'm really glad you spent 10 minutes with this person, because now that, they went and posted a review about how great we are, on Twitter instead of, bashing us 5 minutes earlier. And so it really enables humans to have a better interaction with other humans. Or if it's something like I'm on a manufacturing floor and I'm using AI to detect defects in parts, now when we have an AI, a visual inspection model doing that, now the human can actually focus on what is the root cause. So can I go back up the manufacturing line and identify what is causing the defects? And the AI can also help correlate things that occurred in other parts of the supply chain or manufacturing process with the defect that a human may not have been able to pick up. And so it actually builds better products and build probably better, happier employees, because they're no longer having to throw away their end product, right? No matter how engaged you are in a company, when you're working, you want to feel like it's adding value. Absolutely. Right? And if things are getting thrown away and you don't know why, you feel like you're not adding value. So it's really about augmenting humans and understanding what problem is and how they're going to use it, things like that.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I mean, to be honest with you, I think we should not name it AI. We should name it IA, is individual augmentation rather than artificial intelligence, right? Because it creates all sorts of psychological impact on human when they think that artificial intelligence is more something that's smarter than them. But I really believe our innate quality to question, explore, and adapt and protect, right? Protect will drive ethical AI, in the long run, and trusting us, leading to really trusting the technology we use, right? And to better our lives, improve our businesses, and evolve as a society. So understanding the prediction of AI, but more importantly, the why behind such predictions, help us navigate advancing technology in the world. And it is from this understanding that AI is then governable, sustainable, innovative, and humane, right? I'm a firm believer in growth thrives at intersection of tech and humanity. So here's time for a rapid fire parade of predictions, right? And what will be the number one most fascinating application of AI in everyday life, and then for small to mid-sized business, or for students, or for you personally?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I recently had a knee replacement. And the knee replacement was driven entirely by AI. So they took a CT scan, a CAT scan of my knee. Oh. They identified that there was AI that looked and analyzed and created a model of my knee. It identified the damaged parts of my knee, and actually created a customized piece to fit what was replaced, what they had to take out from the damaged part of my knee. Wow. And then used a robot to do all the surgery. And the robot essentially guided the surgeon so that he could do the surgery as efficiently, as effective as possible. Again, it's augmenting human, not replacing a human. The doctor was still in there doing the work. The robot just helped, and the AI just helped to make sure it was more valuable. So I think we'll see more things like that. where, AI is really impacting us on a daily basis or in critical situations when we need it most. And we'll see many more advancements. Think back again to the pandemic. We keep talking about it because it's top of mind, right? The acceleration of the vaccine development was driven in large part through AI. And hopefully what we'll see in the future are that we will no longer need a flu vaccine every year. We'll have a flu vaccine that holds up to many, many different strains of flu, right? So you hear all H1N1, all these different combinations. Maybe we can get one that's durable to almost every combination so that we don't need one every year. Maybe we need one every 5 years. Same thing with coronaviruses, right? Can we make a pan-coronavirus vaccine? That's going to be driven through AI and science. And then getting into things that we're sort of living with today, right? When we talk about autonomous cars or autonomous vehicles, getting to a point where autonomous vehicles actually are safer than humans, and we trust them. And again, this gets back to, whenever we hear of a car that's being driven autonomously getting into an accident, we say, oh, the AI has gone wrong. But how many accidents did that AI help avoid before that one anomaly of an accident by an autonomous vehicle?
Exactly. Yeah, that's such a profound statement there, Seth. I truly agree with you. We sometimes, really make the emotional judgment on things just only because we don't have enough data points or we don't have enough knowledge to learn. So learning why something happened and where, right, there is an area to improve really expands our capability as people, as human. AI needs to be teachable, right? Able to teach itself as well as us, because we can teach human, we can also teach AI. So when AI can improve upon its processes, recognize and learn from patterns at scale, it really complements our skills someday, and then abilities as human. That should always be the goal for technology, not to detract from what it makes us unique, but interesting also in empathetic someday, right? But to also enhance or add greater value to what is already there. And then, only then I think we will reach much higher ground overall, right? Thank you so much for sharing the invaluable insights with us, Seth. I really, your personal story also resonated with me. So for all the audience today, tune in for 2 other upcoming Spice Talk with IBM on data privacy and AI in enterprise. Stay hungry, stay fearless, and stay grateful.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Helen.
Thank you, Seth.